Now, Trump, I reckon, has harvested votes in the last 72 hours. Just to put our viewers in the picture, the death of the Liberal icon Ruth Ginsburg from the Supreme Court gives Trump an opportunity to appoint a Conservative to the Supreme Court. This being the case, Trump would have the numbers, or the Supreme Court would then be a fortress against a lot of left-wing agenda. The contentious issues which the Democrats would like to prosecute would be lost. Donald Trump would have a 6-3 Conservative majority. He said he'd appoint a woman. It's sad these days that, unfortunately, you've got to talk in gender, but that's the first stroke. And I think it's Barbara Lagoa, a Hispanic mother from Florida, and that would lock in Florida. He's got a majority in the Senate. And so suddenly this unleashes that Christian religious vote, doesn't it, Campbell, for Donald Trump?
Look, it sure does, Alan, and it actually puts those who might oppose a swift confirmation process through the US Senate, firstly through their Judiciary Committee and then the Senate, at a real political disadvantage. I mean, are you going to stand in the way of a woman who's Hispanic, like you just mentioned? That's the hot tip. Would you do that? Politically, that's really bad for the Democrats. It's also very difficult for a couple of the wavering Republicans in the Senate, who it's speculated might, sort of oppose Trump pushing this through. Puts them in a difficult situation as well, Alan. So I think it actually comes up in his favour, this whole issue.
Yeah, and he's got a 53-47 majority in the Senate, so he'll push the thing through, and he'll harvest a heap of votes. Just coming closer to home here, the question of pilots. I mean, you and I have mentioned this before, pilots. Where the hell are the opposition in Queensland? Queensland pilots are out of work, and the government is allowing foreign pilots in to fight the bushfires, and they've already arrived. And you can't hear a voice in opposition. Campbell.
Well, to be fair, Alan Frecklington has spoken out on this one, but I think a whole lot of noise could be made, and more noise could be made on it. So for our viewers, what's happening is we're bringing in pilots from Canada. They'll be based in Bundaberg. I understand it's a 5-year contract. They'll come out for the fire season. They'll be flying these Dash 8 firefighting aircraft. They've been converted. And of course, we've got all these unemployed pilots, masses of pilots. Even the ABC tonight, by the way, Alan, we're talking about the crisis for pilots in the aviation industry in Australia. So why are we bringing in foreign nationals on temporary visas to do this when we've got unemployed Australian pilots? It's crazy.
The Premier says the cost of leasing the aircraft is cheaper than owning them, and therefore having contracted this Canadian company, they obviously bring their own pilots. Now, our pilots could even fly the Canadian planes anyway, couldn't they?
Look, Alan, I've been in political office, and I know that the bureaucrats always try these ones on. There's all that sort of stuff. And in a time like this,
that's it.
The rule book's been ripped up every day of the week. We're seeing, Dr. Young make up the rules. So, as we have seen in other states. So, this is a time to put Australians first. Absolutely first. And one other excuse that was put up, Alan, was that, they're not qualified to fly this aircraft. Well, there's a heck of a lot of fully qualified pilots.
Absolutely.
Again, it's a 5-year deal, Alan.
Absolutely. Yeah,
so surely they could do some on-the-job training in year one with those Canadians and then do the next 4 years with Australians.
Upskilled. They could be easily upskilled. Listen, it wasn't long ago that Scott Morrison carted a lump of coal into Question Time. Now he's caught the zero carbon dioxide emissions bug. So a Hunter Valley gas power plant in a nation short of gas, and he says it won't be on the wish list, it'll be on the done list. And it seems to me both Liberal and Labor are flapping around on energy policy and climate change. What do you make of this? I mean, go to the pub. They won't tell you that climate change is a big issue.
Look, it was a very strange week last week where we saw that announcement. So as Senator Matt Canavan from Queensland quite rightfully pointed out, the Coalition and the PM have gone to the Hunter Valley in the middle of one of the greatest coal precincts in the world and announced a gas-fired power station beside essentially an old coal-fired power station. I mean, it is very odd. And New South Wales, by the way, Gladys Berejiklian and her government have been quite resistant to opening up new gas fields to provide that much-needed gas and to lower prices for consumers and manufacturers in New South Wales. So very, very strange. And I think the Prime Minister's real difficulty here because he seems to be forgetting why, for example, he won in Queensland. And he did very well, by the way, in the Hunter Valley. Didn't quite pick up that seat, from the Labor member, Joel Fitzgibbon. But, that speaks volumes.
What's wrong?
The Labor Party are on the nose because they're abandoning blue-collar workers.
Yes.
And they have abandoned them in Queensland, and that's why the Coalition gets such a darn good result in Queensland. That's why the Prime Minister is popular
is the Prime Minister.
Queensland.
What's wrong with coal? We have the best coal and uranium, more than any other country in the world. We export it so that they can have cheap energy, and we then pay through the roof. I mean, madness has taken over, hasn't it?
Well, it has. I mean, we export coal, but we're now starting to say we won't burn it here. We export uranium, but we certainly won't use it here, other than the research reactor at Lucas Heights in Sydney. A lot of people don't know we have a nuclear reactor, by the way, in Australia. Don't know that the vital cancer-treating isotopes are made here in Australia at a nuclear reactor. But that's all too hard for today's politicians to actually prosecute that argument.
Well done. Now, listen. What about these Greens? I mean, they're all for renewable energy and wind turbines until you shove them in their own backyard, like Zali Steggall. They won't be putting any on Manly Beach, but there's plenty of wind there. Now, the federal government, are talking about an electricity cable. This is what the government's talking about federally, linking Tasmania with mainland Australia to bolster electricity security in Victoria. But Bob Brown says Tasmania will be flooded with wind projects. He doesn't like the visual impact. He wants the wind built in Victoria. Campbell. God, they're unbelievable, aren't they?
Well, look, I'm a great believer in being observer of history and being able to pull up the history of various political matters. So, Alan, just for your viewers this evening, back in the 70s when I was growing up in Tasmania, Bob Brown, made his name fighting the dam down on the west coast of Tasmania. And you know what he said back then, Alan? He said, we don't have to have this hydro dam. We can have a coal-fired power station. Yes, Alan, true, historical fact. He supported a coal-fired power station in the north of the state powered with Fingal Valley coal down near Avoca and Fingal. So he was for coal then. Then, in more recent years, he's been against coal because we've got to go to renewables. Solar and the wind are the go, and he's been a big proponent of that. But now suddenly wind is not good enough. You know what he's supporting now, Alan? He's supporting battery storage. Battery storage, I assume, bolted onto solar, made by any energy-intensive processes, toxic industrial processes with all sorts of downstream consequences. This is the truth of the Greens, Alan. They're a moving feast. The caravan moves on. Really, what they're against is civilised Western living. The things that we enjoy today, they'd really like us to go back living in huts, I'm afraid.
Absolutely.
And sort of subsistence living.
Just come back closer to home before I leave you tonight. I've got to ask you, Tom Hanks and all of those people, I mean, if you're going to be quarantined, you get into a tiny little hotel, they push the food through the door, a lot of it's inedible, and you can't get the kind of medical attention that you require. But Tom Hanks and these people can quarantine in expensive hotels, swan around on the side of pools like the AFL. But I noticed that Jeanette Young, who makes all these decisions, she said the justification for letting these people in is that entertainment and film bring a lot of money into the state. I would have thought all the people wanting to travel to Queensland bring a lot of money into the state.
Exactly, Alan. I mean, and look, just it's a pity that it's Tom Hanks, because I think many of us just love Tom Hanks and love his movies, and not to draw him out, but as an example of doing the wrong thing. But it just is, again, more evidence of the double standard that we saw revealed in the weekend's newspapers. I mean, look. I think I'd feel a whole lot better, and I know you would, Alan, and so would our viewers, if the rules were totally and utterly consistent. There was one rule from Sally from Seaforth in Sydney wanting to come to Queensland, as opposed to Tom Hanks or the AFL or whatever. We need the same standard, the same treatment, not special rules for supposedly special people.
Well, just before you go, therefore, I mean, I can't get up there to Queensland. You are there. What is the mood? Does the ordinary voter support these border lockdowns that Anastasia Palaszczuk has imposed?
Well, you're talking about that just before with Michael, and I think the thing here is that the polling, yes, says that people support it, but I think people are looking beyond this. I think they're looking at what is the plan for economic recovery. I think people have seen the inconsistencies, the lack of logic in many of these things, and they then saw the heartlessness and the callousness of the Premier's approach. And that was a real watershed moment about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, Alan. So I think that if you start to put to people, look, do you want a viable airline? Do you want to be able to travel again? Do you want to be able to have holidays interstate and overseas?
Yes.
Well, we've now got to restart things. Then I think people make different choices. It's how you ask the question in this polling, Alan.
I agree.
And it's also up to the LNP
to prosecute.
I agree with this. It's up to the LNP to frame the argument, to
absolutely.
prosecute the issue.
Over and over again. There's a golden rule in politics, Campbell, as you know. When you're sick of saying it, the electors are only starting to hear it. Great to talk to you.
Absolutely.
Great. Love the energy, Campbell. We'll talk next week. There he is, Campbell Newman.